Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing week 40 of my 2020 reads. This week I actually read a couple of books, all of which were awesome, and then I read quite a few graphic works as well. So first I read Cantoras by Carolina de Robertis, which is a book that I heard about from Adri at perpetualpages. They did an amazing review of this book, which convinced me to pick it up, so I will link that review below. I highly recommend it. Also, I have done a standalone review of this as well because I loved it so much that either will have gone up a couple of days ago or will go up in a few days. So if it's already gone up, I will link that below too. This book was so wonderful. It is absolutely beautifully written queer historical fiction about a group of women in the 1970s and 80s in Uruguay who are dealing with an oppressive military regime that has made their queerness very much not acceptable and trying to deal with the silencing that they face and find a place for themselves. They band together, form a community, and find a space in a remote seaside town where they can really be free. So this story was just absolutely gorgeous. I loved the writing, I loved the atmosphere, I loved the sense of place, I loved the history and the politics, and the way that it really just talked about the experience of these queer women dealing with these oppressions of society and of the dictatorship and how they empowered themselves. It's absolutely lovely. Highly, highly recommend it, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Next, I finished Prime Meridian by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. This is a sci-fi novella that Sush read out loud to me as part of our Space Opera September reading. I'll link info about Space Opera September below. And this was really, really fascinating. I actually ended up loving this book, and I've done a standalone review, which I think I'll get up later this week. But it was one that was kind of hard to get into. So Silvia Moreno-Garcia likes to do takes on different genres, and I think that this is her take on cyberpunk, which is not a genre that I like. And it was kind of hard for me to get into the story, but once I got into it, I really, really loved what she was doing with the story and the messages that she had. It felt very feminist to me, which I always love in her work. The story is about Amelia, who is a woman living in sort of a near future Mexico City that is very dystopian in a lot of mild ways. And she dreams of going to the colony on Mars. But she is held back by all of these things that are wrong in her life, from poverty to family obligations to just so much not working out. And she's so embittered about that and just really kind of one of those people who feels no obligation to society. So her character is very difficult, which was hard to get into, but once I did, I thoroughly loved it. So this book is something that I actually really, really loved. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. But I will caution that it may be hard to get into and it just may not work for everybody. If anybody else has read it, let me know what you thought down below. I'd be curious. Next, I finished The Intrusion of Jimmy by P.G. Wodehouse, which is another book that Sush read out loud to me. This one is one of the bedtime stories that he's been reading to me, so we're trying to work through all of P.G. Wodehouse's stories, and this one I actually had such a fun time with. I did fall asleep so quickly throughout many different parts of it, but especially towards the end, I was so gripped and we had to move it to a daytime story because I just couldn't fall asleep. I was so intrigued by the story. In typical P.G. Wodehouse style, this has a lot of humor and a lot of ridiculousness that really appeals to me. It is about a man, Jimmy, who is kind of somebody who is an actor who became very rich unexpectedly. And on a lark, he makes a bet with somebody and decides to go rob a house, but more just like get into the door and prove that he can do it. And he ends up kind of really falling in love with the daughter of the police officer whose house that is. And they don't see each other for a while, but then they meet up much later in England and antics ensue. This story, like all of his works, it really just has some kind of absurd situations and funny characters, and it's got this really amusing way of having all of the social interactions happen and lots of very distinctive characters in this. So I just had such a fun time with this, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Now moving on to the graphic works that I finished. First, Invisible Kingdom Volume 2 by G. Willow Wilson, illustrated by Christian Ward. This is a series that I heard about from Rachel at Kalanadi, who I will link below. And again, I'm so glad that she mentioned this series because it's great. I really like it. I read Volume 1 last week, and Volume 2 is just as good. I really love the illustrations. I love the way that it kind of moves forward in terms of the world building. This time we have a lot of other characters introduced who are very fascinating, and I kind of like one of our main characters is very bad at making decisions, and sometimes I can really enjoy that in a character. Somebody who's just very much doing what they think is right, even if it's not very practical, especially when the story calls that out as not being a good decision. So there's a lot in here, and the love story also kind of evolves as well, which is very interesting. So I loved the exploration of the world more and the relationship building and the characters. So I just had such a fun time with this as well, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read The Golden Age, Book 1 by Roxanne Moreil, illustrated by Cyril Pedrosa, and translated from French by Montana Kane. So this is an absolutely stunningly beautifully drawn book. I heard about this from Laura at BookBubbler, who I will link below. She always reads the most fascinating graphic work, so I get a ton of recommendations from her channel. And this is one that I really, really loved the art style. It's very, very beautiful in terms of these intense, bold colors. There's a lot of interesting things that are done in terms of the way that motion is shown, in terms of overlaying colors and textures on top of images, and it's just really beautifully drawn. So I loved the artwork in this so much. Although I will say it's kind of it's a very interesting style, so if the style doesn't appeal to you, it may not work for you, but I really did love the illustration style. The storyline is sort of a medieval type of world where there is a princess who should take the throne after her father dies, except that there's kind of a coup and her mother and younger brother kind of take power, and she's forced out of the palace and on the run with a couple of loyal retainers. So what's really interesting about this book is they go on this journey trying to basically find people who can support them and find a way to regain power. But there's a lot of interesting discussions in here about power dynamics, about the ruling class versus the peasants. There's a lot in here about that sharp divide between the poor and the oppressed and those who are in power. Now this book is very much only the first part of the story. It ends very much just almost on a cliffhanger, and you don't really see where the story is going. Some interesting things are brought up in a way that is very uncomfortable, and I'm hoping that the future books, which have not been translated yet, will address some of that, but it was not so great to read in terms of some of the things that were said, some of the representations of characters. There were a couple of things in here like representing somebody who maybe has a mental disability, or representing people who are ugly or fat, or things like that that felt a little offensive, and I'm not sure if the book is going to be making statements about some of these issues as it goes forward, and it's kind of talking about the way that the rich and powerful see things, or if that's kind of also the view that the people who are writing the book take. I'm not really sure. So loved the artwork, thought the story has potential, but I'm a little uncomfortable with some of the stuff it's doing. So I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars, and if the next book is translated, then I will definitely read that and see kind of where it goes. Next, I read A Quick and Easy Guide to They Them Pronouns by Archie Bongiovanni and Tristan Jimerson. I believe that I heard about this from Rogan at Rogan Shannon, who I will link below. This is a very, very short little non-fiction graphic work explaining sort of how they them pronouns work and sort of the etiquette of using them. I thought that this was very well done in terms of presenting a lot of this information. It covered really the basics. They say in the beginning that this is kind of intended to give to somebody who doesn't really understand how to use they them pronouns, or for somebody who is trying to decide if they want to use they them pronouns themselves and like how to go about that. I think that although I liked the information that was presented here, and even though this was short, it was maybe something like 70 pages, I actually feel like it could have been shorter. Sometimes I have this complaint with nonfiction where I feel like there's too much extraneous stuff and I'd rather they just got to the point. I kind of feel as if this book could have been split into two small infographics or pamphlets. One which was kind of how to use they them pronouns and what the etiquette is, and the other is what to do if you want to use they them pronouns. And both of these could have been very short, maybe like 5 to 10 pages each. The way that this was done, it actually felt kind of bloated in terms of having a lot of extraneous things like multiple definitions of what a pronoun is, just things that really, it almost felt like you were bulking up the book to get it to that 70 pages when it didn't need it. So I did like the information that was presented, and I think that especially if you did want to just give this to somebody who wasn't as familiar with they them pronouns, it could be a very good primer. But I also feel like there might be more to the point intros to this than this little book. So it was okay, and I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. And lastly, I read The Girl from the Other Side, volumes 4 and 5 by Nagabe, translated by Adrian Beck, and lettered by Liz Blakely. So this is a continuation of the series that I have been reading for the past couple of weeks, and it really works, I think, for the fall vibes, because if you want kind of a spooky atmosphere, this one does it. Just like all of the previous volumes, the artwork is just really gorgeous, and it's very much the draw for this story, but also the setting, the world building is very interesting. So in this world, there is a plague that turns people into monsters called outsiders, and all of the humans have to stay inside, but there is a little girl, Shiva, who is kind of forced outside of the walls, and an outsider teacher takes care of her. But there's a lot of other stuff going on too that is kind of being uncovered throughout these books. I think that volume 4 especially was really interesting in learning more about the world and learning more about kind of what exactly is going on with Shiva and the outsiders and all of that. So I definitely liked that kind of world building that happened in that one. I gave that one 4 out of 5 stars. And then volume 5 was okay, but it also had a lot of unnecessary drama in the middle of it, some fighting between characters and some things that happened that just, it felt a little overly dramatic to me, even though there were some interesting hints about the way that the world worked that I did like. So I gave that one 3 out of 5 stars. Okay, so that wraps up my reading for this week. If you guys have read any of these books, if you have any thoughts, any comments, anything else, I'd love to hear from you, so just leave me a comment down below.